Hello BookTube, welcome back to my 2026 library tour. In this episode, a continuation of my science fiction and fantasy collection, this time the mass market paperbacks, which are stuffed into the first shelf of the bookcase I'm using for science fiction and fantasy. The bookcase is made of metal and it has a weird method of changing the size of the shelves, and the first shelf ended up going too far up and I don't know how to lower it, so it's basically packed with mass market. So let's get going. So first up is the Faded Sun trilogy by C.J. Cherryh. This is a mass market omnibus edition of Kesrith, Shanjir, and Kutath. I had to go at this about 4 or 5 years ago and didn't get on with it. Toll the Hounds by Steve Erickson. This is one of the Malazan Book of the Fallen novels. I have some of the early ones. I tried the first one, which we should get to relatively soon, and didn't get on with it. So, yeah. Oh, speaking of, they will be here shortly, assuming I can liberate them. Okay. The Star Kings by Edmund Hamilton. I tried this a few years ago for maybe the first Rocket Summer and didn't like it. Pursuit of the Screamer by Anson Dibble. I've never gotten around to it. Picked it up from Friends of the Library Book Sale Nook for not too much money. So here's the first book of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson. So again, I've tried this novel a few times and I've never gotten on with it. I think I picked it up from Golden's Book Exchange during a period where I was really hoovering up as much science fiction and fantasy as I could, although ultimately I didn't get on with much of it. Okay. House of Chains by Steven Erikson, another book with Malazan Book of the Fallen novel. Memories of Ice by Steven Erikson, another Malazan Book of the Fallen novel. And Reaper's Gale by Steven Erikson. I think the last of the Malazan Book of the Fallen novels that I have, but I could be wrong. Count Zero by William Gibson. This is the sequel to Neuromancer and the second of the 3 Sprawl novels, which are seminal works of cyberpunk by William Gibson. I rather like this novel, although it's been probably about 15 years or so since I read it. The Grey Mane of Morning by Joy Chant. I think this is the sequel novel of a duology. I don't think I've ever gotten to this one. But I did read Red Moon and Black Mountain by Joy Chant, which I think is the first book. But I could be wrong. This is a portal fantasy that in which three siblings or a group of siblings travel to a fantasy world, get separated. One of them lives in this world far longer than his siblings do, and eventually they reunite to save the world. And I think they go home. But it's been a very long time since I read it, and it really hasn't left much of an impression on me, outside of quick synopsis. The War of the Flowers by Tad Williams. This is a contemporary portal fantasy, it's about 20 years old now, about a failed musician who learns that he's actually from a fantasy world, and he goes back. And this is that story. I think this might be the only Ted Williams I have left, because I know I sent his epic fantasy trilogy to Steve Donahue a few months back. Grave Peril by Jim Butcher. I still have this novel, which is part of the it's book 3 of the Dresden Files, which is a contemporary fantasy series set in Chicago, which has a mystical or magic detective. Accession by Iain M. Banks. This is one of the culture novels. I read it about going on 20 years ago, because I think I read this on the way back to Texas from San Francisco. And this novel really, really worked. I really enjoyed it. Although I have not had nearly the success with the rest of Banks's work, nor have I actually reread this novel since then. As Shield by Paul Anderson. Have not gotten around to this. Masks by E.C. Blake. I think this is a fantasy series that probably did not make much of an impact, although I've never read it. Homunculus by James P. Blaylock. Never read it. The most notable thing about this book is that the actor the voice actor who played King Bradley in Fullmetal Alchemist is Ed Blaylock, and a big thing about Fullmetal Alchemist is homunculi, so that's probably the reason why I picked this up. The Coming of the Horse Clans by Robert Adams. Have not read this. Jirek by Stephen Burst. This was a long-running fantasy series. I don't know how much of it I tried to get to or not. It's been a long time. The Tree of Swords and Jewels by C.J. Cherryh. Have never gotten around to this. Also by C.J. Cherryh, Fortress in the Eye of Time, which again have not gotten to yet. Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. Have not gotten to. Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence. First book in a grimdark fantasy, I think it's a trilogy, which is kind of Mark Lawrence's shtick. He writes dark or grimdark fantasy series. I tried this novel a few years ago and absolutely hated what I read of it. Tor by Peter V. Britt, the 5th book in the Demon Cycle series. I think this is the concluding volume. I picked up this series several years ago, probably about 6 or 7, and eventually got around to the first book and didn't like it much and didn't finish it and never got around to any of the others. Speaking of the first book, I think it's The Warded Man. So, yeah. The rest of the series are behind it. Dialogue War, which is the 3rd book. Desert Spear is the 2nd book. And the 4th book is The Skull Throne. I also have a few novels by David Eddings. Domes of Fire, which is the 1st book in the Tamuli trilogy, which is basically he wrote a huge amount of things. But what I have of him is 2 trilogies. The first one is the Elenium, and then the second one is the Tamuli, which I read when I was a teenager, and I liked them then, and I got rid of them, and I wanted to have them back during a period where I must have all fantasy, but I never really completed that task, nor did I ever go back to them. So this is the Sapphire Rose, which is the concluding volume of the Elenium trilogy. And the Ruby Knight, which is the 2nd book of the Elenium trilogy. So I would need the Diamond Throne, and then I don't remember the other 2 books of the Tamuli. Not that I'm actually going to get either of those books. This is Neuromancer by William Gibson, the first of the Sprawl novels, an early work of cyberpunk, and I read this novel about 20 years ago. I think I was reading it waiting for the flight from San Francisco back to Texas. And I probably could go back to it, even though where I'm at right now, chances are good that I probably would not enjoy it. But you never know. So The Element of Fire by Martha Wells. I don't know if this is part of a series or a standalone. So the next 2 books are by Scott Lynch, The Lies of Locke Lamora and Red Seas Under Red Skies, the first 2 novels in the Gentleman Bastard series. I think it's still a trilogy, but a 4th book might have come out, or maybe Scott Lynch is one of those authors that is taking him forever to get around to the next book in the series. I don't know. I read The Lies of Locke Lamora a long time ago, did not like it, but for some reason picked it up, which I do. Triton by Samuel Delany. So this is one of his, I think it's kind of space opera-y. I think I tried this a few years ago and didn't really like it, what I read of it. It has that problem I have with a lot of older science fiction and even newer science fiction where the world building, particularly the cultural world building, just it seems dated. It seems too much like not much has changed since the present, and that's kind of baloney. So the next two books are by Ricardo Pinto, The Stone Dance of the Chameleon. So this is The Chosen, which is the first book in the series. It's a weird fantasy without magic that is a fairly early example of gay fantasy, but it doesn't really appeal to me because it's very grimdark, very tortury, and so I tried this novel and then picked it up, which, yeah, I do, and have never really gone back to it, even though I do have, I think, the whole of it still. This is the final volume, The Third God. So I think at some point we'll probably get to the second book. I don't think Pinto has written anything else. Although I think he has basically just rehashed this a few times. Not as separate stories, but just rehashing this thing series. Traitor's Moon by Lynn Llewellyn. This is the third and final volume of the Night Runner series. Have not gotten to. The second book is Stalking Darkness. And the third book is the first book is Look in the Shadows. So I did read the first two books in a later series of hers that when I was a teenager. Oh yeah, The Bone Dolls Twin and Hidden Warrior. I did read those two, and I liked it, but that was also like about 20 years ago or more. Okay, so The Death of the Necromancer by Martha Wells. I'm pretty sure this is a standalone. City of Bones by Martha Wells. Again, I'm not entirely sure if this is part of a series or not. I've never gotten around to it. Quake Keep by Andre Norton. Never gotten around to it. The Mask of the Sun by Fred Saberhagen. Never gotten around to it. Changeling by Roger Zelazny. I want to say this is some kind of fantasy, maybe science fiction fantasy mashup. I don't know. I've never gotten around to it. The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is part of the Hainish cycle of novels. I read this novel over 20 years ago for a class I was actually a TA for, and I really did not like it. But again, as I've done repeatedly in the past, Ursula K. Le Guin is a major figure in science fiction and fantasy, and so I thought I should have this in my collection, even though I don't really like the novel. Although I will be giving it another go later this year for the Heinisch event here on BookTube. The Ringworld Engineers by Larry Niven. Never gotten around to it. Starborn by Andre Norton. Again, never got around to it. And finally, I am incorrect. I have Shadow March by Tad Williams, which I think is the first novel in a series. So that pretty much concludes the mass market tome of my science fiction and fantasy collection. And that did not take me nearly as long as I thought it would. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now and put these books back up before I enjoy the rest of my evening, and I will be uploading this video tomorrow on Sunday. So hope you enjoy it. I will film the middle shelf tomorrow in 2 separate videos, and so those will be up on Monday and Tuesday, and then there will be a final 1 or 2. So I should actually finish science fiction and fantasy this week with maybe some time to spare. And then the next week I will move on to my manga collection. So look forward to that. So any BookTube, until I see you next time, thank you and have a great rest of your day, or evening, or morning, or whenever it is you watch this.